This story is generated and narrated by AI. If you notice any glitches in the voice, feel free to leave a comment. Your feedback helps improve future videos. Have you ever heard your name whispered when no one was there? Let me tell you what happened. I never thought I'd end up living alone in a cottage with cracked stone walls and a garden choked by weeds. Not when I spent most of my life in Paris, wrapped in sound and cement and the hum of the metro under my feet. But I wasn't running toward the countryside. I was running from something, from a silence that had settled inside me 2 years ago and never left, a silence shaped like my sister, Emily. She was younger than me by almost a decade, bright, talkative, the kind of person who laughed with her whole body, and then one day, she didn't answer my calls. I found her in her apartment 3 days later. There was no note. Just her old tape recorder playing an empty cassette on loop, hissing quietly to itself. So yes, I ran. I found the listing for the house in southern France by accident, on a site for artists looking for retreats. It was cheap, too cheap, a limestone cottage built before the revolution, tucked between poppy fields and crooked vineyards in a place so small it barely had a name. No neighbors close enough to hear you scream, or to ask why you talk to your dead sister. The house itself was worn but solid. Wooden beams sagged but held. There was even a fireplace with soot still clinging to the stone like a memory of warmth. The only strange thing was the well. It stood at the far end of the yard, behind a wall of thorny hedge made of old gray stone, its opening sealed with a rusted iron grate. There was no bucket, no rope. It had been dry for years. The owner's note said, "Useless, harmless." But the locals thought otherwise. I met the first of them at the village bakery 3 days after I arrived. An old woman in a red shawl, sitting outside with a cigarette burning down to her fingers. She eyed me as I stepped out with a loaf of pain de campagne under my arm. "You bought the Ratchet place," she said. I nodded. "Just for a few months." "I'm writing." She narrowed her eyes. "Then don't listen to it." "Excuse me?" "The well. Don't listen when it calls." She flicked her cigarette to the ground, crushed it under her heel, and walked away. I laughed it off. Of course I did. The French countryside is full of ghost stories. Old women talk to cats and warn you about fairies in the woods. But when I got back to the house, the sky already turning violet with dusk, I found myself staring at that grate, at the well. I didn't sleep well that night. The bed creaked with every breath I took, and somewhere, just as I was drifting off, I thought I heard something. A sound like whispering. Not loud. Not clear, just the suggestion of words, like breath caught in stone. I told myself it was the wind moving through the hedges, that the old woman's warning had seeded something in my mind. The next day, I found a letter slid under the door. It wasn't sealed, no address, just folded once in thick, stained paper. Inside, in a tight, slanted hand, were 5 words. She never stopped calling me. I stood there for a full minute, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. The ink was fresh, no name, nothing else. I checked the road, the yard, even behind the hedges. No one, just the quiet hum of bees in the distance and the low creak of old wood adjusting in the heat. I tried to work that day, but the words wouldn't come, so I walked through the tall grass to the well. The grate was covered in moss and rust. When I touched it, flakes of iron came off in my hand. I peered down. Darkness, No sound, just a thick, velvet blackness that felt full, not empty, but waiting. That night, I heard her voice for the first time. It came just past midnight, soft, gentle, just outside my window. Julian. That was my name, but no one here knew it. I hadn't told anyone. I froze, sat up in bed, heart punching the inside of my ribs. Emily, I whispered before I could stop myself. Silence. Then very faintly from the garden, Julian, come outside. I should have called someone, should have locked the door, turned on all the lights, played loud music to drown it out. But instead I crept down the stairs barefoot, as if in a trance, stepped out into the moonlight. The wind stirred the tall grass. The well stood silent in the distance. No one there. But the air smelled like her, lavender and chamomile, the lotion she always used, the one she left behind in her apartment. I remember holding the bottle for hours the day she died, afraid to open it, afraid not to. I walked toward the scent, toward the well. When I reached it, I stood with my hand on the cold grate for a long time. Then I whispered, "If it's really you, say something only you would know." Silence. Then, softly, impossibly, I heard, "Le Cyclope. The monster you drew in my birthday card when I was 6. I staggered back. She remembered that. A stupid sketch I made on a napkin, a one-eyed cartoon with a party hat. I never showed anyone else. I didn't sleep again that night, didn't write, didn't eat. I just sat by the window, watching the garden. And every so often, I heard her voice again, asking me to come closer, to listen, to open the grate, to let her out. I spent the next 3 days trying to convince myself I was not going insane. I told myself grief plays tricks, that trauma echoes in strange ways, like thunder long after the lightning has faded. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard, not even when I returned to the bakery and found the old woman waiting again, her shawl tighter this time, her cigarette unlit. "I'm not sleeping well," I replied. "You heard her, didn't you?" That stopped me cold. I looked at her, trying to read something, anything in her expression. She simply nodded toward the bench beside her. "She speaks to the ones who grieve," she said when I sat. "The ones who still listen." "Who is she?" I asked. "The widow," the old woman whispered. "She lived there long ago, before there was even a village, when the land was wild. She came from the mountains, they say, married a farmer. And when the crops failed and the sickness came, her husband fell into the well and broke his back. She screamed for help. No one came. She died down there?" "No," she said. "She threw herself in after him. But she didn't die." The woman looked at me now with something between pity and fear. She waited. Years, maybe. Long enough to learn how to talk through the stone. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. "She doesn't call out names," I said carefully. "Not usually." "She calls what's already inside you," the woman said. "She just wears the voice you'll answer to." That night, I sealed the windows, turned up the volume on every device I had. But still, just after midnight, the power flickered and died, and with the darkness came her voice again. "Julian, it's so dark down here. I can't see you." I sat on the floor with my hands over my ears, whispering my sister's name like a prayer, but I couldn't block it out, not really. Because part of me wanted to listen. On the 5th day, I removed the grate. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was more like an itch, a compulsion. I told myself I just needed to see, to know. If it was just an old shaft filled with dirt and stone, then I could bury the voice with it. Still darkness. But this time, the whisper rose immediately. "Thank you." I backed away, breathing hard, and that's when I saw the second note. Not in the house, it was lying beside the well, weighted by a stone. This one was longer, still handwritten in that same tight, slanted script. It won't stop. Not once you open it. The voice will know your name, your sorrow, and it will take your face, one memory at a time. I scanned the trees, the yard, even the roof. No sign of anyone. But I wasn't alone anymore. That much I knew. The following morning, I made the mistake of speaking back. I'd barely slept. My reflection was beginning to look unfamiliar. Sunken eyes, pale skin, a faint buzzing in my ears that didn't go away. So when her voice came again, asking for me, pleading this time, I answered, "Why are you doing this?" The well was silent for a beat. Then, "Because you opened the door." By the 7th day, the dreams began. I would wake gasping in my bed, the sheets damp with sweat, dreams of falling, of drowning in a well that had no bottom, and always, always, her hand reaching for me from the darkness. Sometimes it was Emily's face I saw, sometimes it wasn't. I called a man in the village who did repairs, Claude, in his late 60s, with hands like tree roots and a beard that smelled faintly of oil and wine. "Cover the well," I said. "Seal it with stone if you have to." He went pale. "The Racha well?" I nodded. He shook his head, slowly. "I can't help you with that, monsieur." "Why not?" "Because the last man who tried started talking in voices not his own. Said the widow told him secrets about people long dead. Then he walked into the vineyards one morning and never came back. He left without another word. That afternoon, I began boarding up the windows. If I couldn't leave, and I felt, somehow, that leaving was no longer possible, I could at least contain whatever this was. But the voice didn't need doors or windows or permission. It lived in my memories, in my guilt, in the empty spaces grief hollowed out of me and left exposed. That night, I woke to find the front door ajar. The wind had picked up, cold, carrying something like a smell with it. Old stone, damp cloth, decay. And on the floor, muddy footprints leading from the door to the stairs. I followed them, heart thudding. They stopped just outside my bedroom. No one there. Until I turned and saw her at the end of the hall. She didn't move, not at first. just stood there at the end of the hallway. The light from my bedroom faintly spilled onto her face. But there was something wrong with it. The features were familiar, yet off, as if my memory of my sister had been sculpted from damp clay and left in the dark to warp. Her eyes were too deep, her mouth didn't close fully, and when she tilted her head, it made no sound, as if her neck was filled with liquid. "Emily," I said, barely above a whisper. Her mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. "Not really. You left me in the dark." I ran. Not back into my room. That suddenly felt too small, but down the stairs, past the footprints that had not yet dried, and out into the night. The well stood open, its throat black and silent. I stood there, barefoot in the wet grass, breathing like an animal. And then I said the one thing I had promised myself I never would. "What do you want?" There was a pause, a long one. Then from the well, "I want your memory. You remember her too clearly, too warmly. Let me soften the edges. Let me make room." The next morning, I found a photo on the kitchen table. It hadn't been there the night before. It was of Emily and me in the Alps 2 years before she died, but the left half of the photo had been burned. Her face gone. I checked my phone. All the photos of us together were corrupted. Glitched. Either her side was smeared and blackened, or replaced by strange static that looked almost like water. That same afternoon, Luke returned, the boy from the bakery. He came unannounced, with a basket of figs and a book under his arm. "I thought you might want company," he said. "Most people who move here don't last long." He sat with me in the garden. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. Not directly, but I asked about the well again. Luke grew quiet. "My brother used to hear voices, too," he said finally. "After our mother passed, he said they sounded like her, but wrong." "What happened to him?" "One day he climbed down into the well with a rope," Luke said. "And when I pulled it up later, the rope was wet, but empty." He stood to leave, then turned back and said, "She doesn't want to be forgotten, so she takes the things you can't afford to lose." That night, I dreamed of Emily again, only this time she was in the well, floating. Her mouth opened as I approached, and water began to pour from it in slow, impossible streams. Her eyes rolled back, and beneath her skin, something pulsed like a second face trying to push through. I woke screaming. I tried to leave the house that morning, tried to pack a bag and drive back to Marseille. But the engine wouldn't turn. The battery had been torn out. Literally ripped. I walked the 5 kilometers into the village, but found the streets empty, the bakery closed, the shutters on the homes drawn tight. I knocked on 3 doors. No one answered. Only when I passed the church did I see a figure, the old woman again, sitting alone on the steps, her eyes red. "You tried to leave," she said. Not a question. "She won't let you. Not now." "Then what do I do?" I asked. "Remember her. "But not like this," she said. "She'll twist every memory you have. You must give her something else." What? A story, a lie, a memory that never was. That night, I sat by the well and spoke aloud. I told the widow about Emily, but I changed the story. I told her Emily never died, that she moved to Canada, married, had children, that she would write to me every spring, that we spoke on the phone just last week. And for the first time in nights, the whisper did not come. But silence is not safety. Because the next morning, I forgot my sister's birthday, not just the date, the month. Then I couldn't recall the name of the man she dated before the accident or the way she used to hum when she cooked. Each day, something else vanished, a little more of her, like someone was plucking threads from a tapestry until it frayed beyond recognition. And then, I stopped dreaming of her. I stood in the yard the next evening and whispered her name. No answer. I asked the well if it was satisfied. This time, it whispered something new. You remembered wrong. Now you remember nothing. It's hard to explain what it feels like to lose someone twice. Once to death, once to forgetting. Grief has weight, but this was the absence of weight, a floating, hollow ache where something once lived. It didn't happen all at once. The final memory faded on a Tuesday. I remember that much. I was washing a glass in the sink when it slipped, and as it shattered, I tried to recall her laugh. And couldn't. After that, I stopped fighting it. Let the garden go wild. Let the house grow cold. Stopped writing. Stopped checking my phone. Even the villagers stopped coming by. I was alone, truly, finally alone. Until one night, the whisper changed. Not a voice, a breath, like something stirring for the first time in a long while. Then a creak at the top of the stairs. I lit a candle, walked slowly toward the sound, and there, just past the final step, was a trail of damp footprints. They led back to my bedroom. I followed them, of course I did, and found the door wide open. Inside, someone sat on the edge of the bed. She had her back to me, hair long and dark, soaking wet. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. Because she turned, and where her eyes should have been, there was only glistening dark. And then she smiled. "You've made space now," the thing said. "Let me fill it." That's when I understood. It had never wanted my memories. It wanted the absence they left behind. Because grief is a barrier, love is armor, but forgetfulness is invitation. I left the house that night with only a lantern and a length of rope, tied it to the old winch, lowered myself into the well. The descent was slow, the stone slick with moss, the air cold and growing colder. But below, there was no water. Only earth and something pulsing. It looked like roots at first, veins, but as I got closer, I saw it was hair. Hair woven into the wall, braided, twisted, grown into the stone itself. And from the roots, faces. Not fully formed, just impressions like wet clay masks pushed from the inside. I saw Emily there, and Luke's brother, and dozens more, women and men, expressions frozen in the moment of forgetting. At the center, a shape stirred, limbs too long, fingers too many. Its face was a blur, not featureless, but ever-shifting, filling itself with stolen identity. It reached toward me, not in violence, in invitation. "There's more to forget," it whispered. "Let me help." I don't remember what I did next. Maybe I screamed. Maybe I climbed. Maybe I let go. But I woke up in the garden. The rope still hung from the well, frayed at the bottom. The stones were warm, as if something had crawled out. It no longer whispers at night. Because it doesn't have to. It's in the house now, in the photos, in the mirrors. Sometimes I see my reflection blink when I do not. I don't remember my sister, but I still wear the necklace she gave me. At least, I think she gave it to me. The name engraved on it is unfamiliar now, but the metal is cold, and sometimes it hums. If you find yourself in the south of France and someone offers you a quiet cottage for a bargain, decline. And if you hear a voice calling from a well, offering to ease your pain, to take your grief, to give you peace, close the window, burn your photos, and leave. Because once you forget what you lost, it will remind you with what it becomes. If this story gave you chills, consider subscribing to Whispers in the Shadows for more first-person horror based on real folklore and imagined nightmares. What would you have done if you heard whispers from your well? Leave a comment below, and maybe don't listen too closely tonight.